Hi guys, welcome to this video and welcome to this beastie here. This is the FlyJSim Boeing 727 series study V2. And this is the second video in the review I'm doing in regards to this aircraft. So video 1 was all about the interior and exterior modelling, and this video is going to be about the systems and also the flight handling and dynamics. Now the main key with the systems is that this thing has the word study in the title, and so it's in my opinion appropriate to have a look and see if it justifies that title. Now at that point you've then got the decision or the consideration as to what contributes a study sim. And there's no definition out there, so different people will have different interpretations of what a study sim is. Now my interpretation is more along the lines of, if I were to be an operator of this thing in real life, either learning how to operate it or actually using it for some value in terms of practicing instrument routines or whatever, could I use this as a valid training tool? And that's the basis upon which I'm having a look at this really, and as a result this video focuses on the functionality of the systems and also then the flight dynamics and handling. Now one of the things that's often asked with the videos is in relation to what scenery I'm using. This is the Aerosoft Manchester scenery, Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, which is payware scenery, and we're in X-Plane 10, and I do have some photorealistic scenery lurking around, but fundamentally it's X-Plane 10 with Manchester we'll be flying out of. In terms of the flight, I have prepped a route. We'll be having a look at the x-fmc in terms of programming that briefly, and consequently we will include that as part of this, although we're going to fly a very limited part of the route, so you're not going to see the full functionality of it from end to end on a flight. But without further ado, let's jump into the cockpit and get going. So we'll have a quick look at the panel now then. This is the main instrument panel. A lot of it obviously is powered up because the APU is running, so a lot of lights are out, etc. But what we will do is we'll have a look at a couple of the more interesting elements. We will mention this later on, the pneumatic brake. Now in terms of the instruments, one of the really nice things, and for example one of the things that differentiates between say a study sim and a non-study sim, is the ability to set different nav aids and different instrumentation on each side. Now that's pertinent if I do this. You can see we get a little caption up here. This is a comparator. Now what this is designed for is to make sure that there is if there's any difference between the captain's and first officer's instrumentation or critical elements of instrumentation, so for example the altimeter barometric pressure setting or the altimeter readings, then it flags to the crew there's an issue, and then they can cross-refer and cross-check. It's a very nice feature. It's very nice that it's included in here. You'll see occasional other lights during startup, etc. So for example you see the power light or you know the localizer light, etc. If for whatever reason then there's a difference between the two. However, we can cancel it like that, and what we will do is we'll put that back to 2992. So there we go, and that should give pretty much the same altitude. And likewise, you know, there's a lot of duplication across the instruments. However, there's certain instruments which are on one side and not the other. So the SAT, static air temperature, and the standby altimeter are on different sides, not necessarily available to both crew very easily at all. And then down here you've got the hydraulic brake pressure, for example. So it's all good stuff. We will put the parking brakes on, although we've got no full-blown hydraulics at the moment. As we go up overhead, you can see that in effect actually it's quite a reduced panel compared to a 737, a modern 737, obviously because of the nature of the fact that the third crew member's been removed. But you can see there's an awful lot of switchgear up here, which actually probably about 80% of it gets used very little. It gets checked in the pre-flight stuff just to make sure it's in the right position, and then the vast majority of it is ignored. So we can test the stall warning, for example. We can test it in terms of normal test, which is all very well and good. We can mess around with the hydraulics if we want to, and you can see it's got a very nice thing. These switch covers in real life do exactly this. When you flick it up, you can flick the switch, but a lot of the time when you put it back, it puts it back to its normal or correct state, which is really very nice. So in effect, you know that the only way it can be in anything other than the correct state is if the guard is up. Window heat over here. In terms of this aircraft. It's got a plethora of lights for that kind of thing, but you can see again very similar to the main panel and very similar to the first Flight Engineers panel. There's a lot of organisation to it in a general sense. So you've got a lot of the hydromechanical stuff up here in terms of engine start, alternate flaps, and also your hydraulic systems up here, and then you get down to your lighting panel. All of this is lighting, for example. Then you've got your various heating elements on the right hand side here, and you've got some miscellaneous nonsense in the middle, which is just bits and bobs. At the end of the day, eventually you get to the point where they've just got to stick stuff where it fits. Engine instruments in the middle. These lights are useful in terms of starting, so they are dual purpose lights. What they do is they show either low oil pressure, which is important when you're starting an engine. You want to see the oil pressure rise because otherwise you destroy the mechanicals of the engine. The other thing that these lights show up for is where your bypass for the filter comes into play. Obviously oil systems have filters, so if there's swarf or metal fragments or whatever floating around in the oil, the filter could eventually become blocked over a period of time. The last thing you want is the oil system to stop supplying oil to the engine. So what you get instead then is you get a bypass valve will open up as the pressure increases to the sort of breakover point of that valve. And generally what happens then is you'll get a light will indicate that the bypass valve has opened, which tells you there's a problem with the filter. It doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't got oil. It just tells you that you potentially need to consider shutting that engine down or managing it as best you can, at which point you have a very good conversation with your flight engineer and also potentially maintenance back at base. You get all of them come on, of course, that's a slightly different issue and you might want to reevaluate what you're doing. And then finally communications down here. So it's fairly sensibly laid out. It's not quite as bad as some of the aircraft that are out there, but it's not quite Airbus logic either. So in terms of the electrical systems, they are fairly well replicated in this. One of the key things is that in the actual aircraft, the electrical systems are replicated or have a very high level of redundancy. So although you could consider it to be engine 1, engine 2, engine 3, it doesn't quite work like that. What they do is feed into bus bars. Now for those who aren't familiar, the bus bar, traditionally it was a large lump of copper. I don't know what it is these days. But in effect what happened is the bus bar was basically one huge terminal that fed, the generator would feed the terminal, and then the terminal would feed all of the systems that were connected to it. Now the terminals are the bus bars. In this aircraft, you can see down here, you've got a number of gauges in relation to it, and the main thing in relation to this aircraft is that the bus bars, the AC power to the bus bars operate at 400 Hertz. And these little switches down here are used to increase and decrease the frequency of the generators. There is a tolerance and an intolerance, and if you have an issue, these two lights will come on. When the 400 Hertz is synchronized between the three engines, these lights go out, which is potentially quite significant. Now there is a tolerance, and the bus bars in terms of the, I can't remember if it's the essential bus bar or one of the other bus bars, there is an element of automatic balancing, but we won't go into that in too much depth. As you can see, these things have the potential to be quite deep. Now as we go up here, we've got the AC generator drive. These things, they're also known as IDGs, integrated drive generators. Basically what they are is each engine has a generator bolted onto the side of it. Now the generator can have issues in terms of overheating, oil problems, whatever it may be, and you may need to disconnect the generator from the engine to prevent a fire or over voltage situation or whatever it might be. These switches can be can be operated on the ground or in the air. And you get the low pressure light comes on, and they are hydromechanical. So basically what that means is that there's not a mechanical link between the engine and the IDG. There's a hydromechanical pump basically. So if you imagine there's a pump that links the engine to the IDG, and by varying the output of the pump you can then make sure that despite the engine speed you maintain your 400 Hertz and you maintain your power within limits. So you can see now that the generator drive oil temperature has dropped because basically we're not firing it through there. Now what we can do is at this point we can just have a mess around with some of these galley power, etc. We're not going to mess around with, but in terms of the DC meters, you can see that we can mess around with these, and you see that there is variation, and if we had no DC power you would see a significant variation there. In terms of what we've got here, you can see the generators are not actually on at the minute. They're not integrated with the rest of the electrical system, so what we will do is we will turn a couple of them on. and you'll see what happens with regards to that. So these are coming on. Now this shouldn't do anything, you see, because we've got the IDG off, these won't close. This, however, will. What you can see here now is generators 1 and 3 are functioning. Generator 2, it's tripped. I can't close this. It's just not going to work. So with all that in mind, that's where we're at, and if we now mess around with this, you can see that generator 2, the failure light comes on. Generator 3 and 1, it's fine. Likewise, if we go down here, these are the voltage and frequencies here, and you can see that these things should be running at 400. That's running at 400. That's obviously at 0 because the generator's dead. We've disabled it. Generator 1 back up to 400, and then obviously you've got your bus tie, which is your general bus frequency, and if you were to go all the way around here, you get your APU, which is currently on. So what we'll do is we'll turn our APU off. Don't need it anymore. Chances are that's just caused a failure by turning the whole thing off too quickly. Now in terms of in here, what we've got, if we look at engine 2, because of what we've done with the engine 2, we've got generator failure. The reason it's showing a generator failure is because we've disconnected the IDG. Now the key with an IDG, integrated drive generator, or the AC generator drive as it is here, is that here can only be reconnected on the ground. So if for whatever reason you have to disconnect the generator from the actual engine itself, if you're in flight, it's a one-way process, a one-way street. You are not getting that thing back until you're on the ground. So you know, that's one of the situations where if you've got a twin-engine aircraft and you have to disconnect the electrics for one, and for whatever reason you have to potentially consider load shedding, and a lot of modern aircraft that's automatic anyway. So you know, that's how it works. Now this little gauge down here is an interesting gauge in as much as it tells you a little bit of information about the performance of the oil system for the AC generators. Now, in terms of the oil system, basically the link between the AC generator and the engine is a hydromechanical system. What that means is that to maintain the 400 Hertz, what happens is there's a generator, the engine generates oil pressure, and by varying the oil pressure through the pump, you can generate the speed at which the generator turns. So that's a very basic understanding of it, as I understand it anyway. But in terms of the system, one of the ways of measuring the performance of the efficiency between the engine driving the generator is to basically measure the rise and the temperature of the oil going in. Now obviously the key here is that if the oil system overheats, that would be one of the reasons why you potentially have to disengage and shut down the AC generator drive, which obviously ends up with the dead needle here. However, what we can see is the 2 meters here. Now at the moment it's showing in, which is the temperature of the oil going into the generator drive unit. If I get a rise, you can see the difference between the oil going in and the oil coming out, and you can see there's 2 different scales. So for the rise, so at the moment we've got a very small rise in the oil temperatures, which is fine. We're happy with that. So really that's the electrical panel in its first instance. If we fail things, then obviously it will affect the systems. However, as I say, there's an awful lot of redundancy in this. So at the moment I'm not overly concerned in relation to that. So yeah, that's pretty much the system as we see it at the moment. So in terms of the system up here, the environmental and pressurization system, it is fully functional in terms of its behavior. However, obviously one of the key things, well, there's only really 2 areas or 3 areas where this potentially could cause our simulator pilot concerns. All the gauges, to the best of my knowledge, work as they should, and all the controls work as they should. In terms of actual operation of the flight, there's only a couple of things that are really going to cause any concern. The first thing is in terms of the engine bleeds. If you don't have them configured correctly, you won't have adequate air pressure to start the engines, and as you can see here, we're now down to 20 psi. So that's not a good state of affairs for the engine, and if I turn the packs on, you'll see it drops quite far down. You will also see now the temperature controls are auto, but the aircraft has recognised it needs to put hot air into the system. So with that in mind, now these switches here can be quite significant because their duct overheats. So if you have an overheating air duct, there's a risk of fire, for example, and you would want to potentially look at that. And you can see the gauge here, cabin control, control cabin, is managing itself nicely, and this one's starting to come down as well. So they are functioning as you would expect, which is all very well and good. And you can see we've got varying ways where we can check the air temperatures, all very well and good. However, the key thing for this whole thing is this little switch down here. This is the ground flight. The ground basically allows the aircraft to depressurize. Flight allows the aircraft to pressurize. And obviously, as you climb into the Earth's atmosphere, you want to be able to pressurize the aircraft. Otherwise, you suffer from hypoxia. And hypoxia is basically a lack of oxygen getting to the brain. It can happen for a number of reasons, but one of the most common ones in terms of aviation relates to failed pressurization or lack of pressurization, be it through an emergency or a spontaneous decompression of the cabin, or, as has happened on occasions in history, this little switch here, this single switch, has forgotten to be switched over, and consequently, you've ended up with situations where aircraft have had issues with hypoxia, which is why the crews have their emergency oxygen masks. So that switch is functioning in this. If you don't turn it to flight, you will find that you will suffer from hypoxia, and in X-Plane 10 basically what you get is a gradually darkening screen. It can take a couple of seconds to figure out what the heck is going on, and then as soon as you figure out what the heck is going on, you fumble for that switch, potentially level off the climb or even go into an emergency descent. Now this panel is probably one of the most fun ones, and it's also one of the ones where you can really see the systems in operation. A lot of aircraft, what you'll find is they have a system A and a system B, and not all aircraft, but most aircraft will have some form of standby. Now, the way that this thing's designed, most aircraft will have a left and a right engine, and they will have a engine-driven pump on each engine, and they will have a single electric pump for each system. So hydraulic system A, for example, would have one engine-driven and one electric-driven. Hydraulic system B, one engine, one electric, and so on and so forth. Here they've gone down a different route. Hydraulic system A, which has the bulk of the heavy lifting, so to speak, that is driven by the engine pumps, and system B is driven by two electric pumps, which is it's an interesting way of doing it. And then finally you've got the hydraulic standby. Now the hydraulic standby is actually a really, really important system. It's easier to describe the things that this system doesn't do, i.e. what System Bravo does. System Bravo does the aft air stairs, inboard flight spoilers, upper rudder, and the main gear brakes. So that's pretty much, it does have input into the ailerons and elevators as well, but that's pretty much everything that does. So the electrical pumps have a very low load in terms of, if you imagine the demand on them. The engine pumps have a much higher load, so these things deal with the ground spoilers, outboard flight spoilers, ailerons, elevators. They also deal with lower rudder, leading edge devices, so slats and Kruger flaps, trailing edge flaps, the gear, landing gear, nose wheel steering, for example, nose landing gear braking, tail skid. This system has a massive amount of responsibility. Now, there's an element here in terms of the ground interconnect, which can be operated here. So this ground interconnect allows you to draw system B into system A. So your electrical system can supplement your engine-driven system, which is obviously potentially important. If you consider one of the elements here is that we don't have necessarily duplication on all systems between the two sides. So, for example, in terms of trailing edge flaps, it's not interconnected between the two sides. The ground interconnect, obviously, you would only use it on the ground, but it's limited in terms of what you would use it for in terms of operating the aircraft. However, this is the interesting bad boy over here. So the hydraulic system Bravo, as we've said, just does a few things, but predominantly it supports Alpha more than anything else. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the functions and the events in terms of what we've got. And you can see here we've got no hydraulic pressure in the system. We've got good quantity but no pressure. Now the hydraulic standby system, it's not functioning at the moment. It only fires itself up if one of two things happen. The first thing is if we activate the alternate flaps. So if I lift that and turn the alternate flaps on, then you'll see the green light comes on, and basically what's happening is the standby system's going, oh, hang on a minute, if you're using alternate flaps, got a bit of an issue, I'm going to need to help you out here. The second way you can do it is you can turn around and turn these bad boys off, and you'll see it comes on there. Now, why does it come on with those three switches? Well, this aircraft has manual reversion controls for elevators and ailerons. It does not have any manual reversion for rudders. So the rudders are, I say rudders, it's a useful way to describe them. There's an upper rudder and a lower rudder. So the upper rudder is controlled by system Bravo, the lower rudder by system Alpha. Well, of course, if you have complete hydraulic failure for whatever reason of both systems, you're fine with ailerons and elevators, you can still control them manually, but you can't control the rudder. So what you then have is your hydraulic standby system. Now the hydraulic standby system does very, very little. It does your lower rudder and your leading edge devices. By leading edge devices I'm on about Kruger flaps and slats, but that's to enable you to have a somewhat reduced landing speed and a greater lift at lower speed, but that is very, very limited. But it's nice to see that the two mechanisms for engaging it are actually live. Now one of the things to note here in terms of these switches, unlike the generator drive, the generator drive is just a safety cover. Once you flick the switch, it just stays wherever you've put it, regardless of what you do with the safety cover. The system is basically dead. With this, what you'll find is when you close the cover, it automatically puts the switch to the normal position. So we've disengaged these. If I close all of these, you can see they're all in the normal position now. And if I go down here, the green light is out. So in terms of actually, if you like, functioning the system, that's how it works, and we're all good there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate what happens if you haven't got all of your hydraulics working. So the first thing we'll do is pop outside. Now in terms of hydraulics, for example, we've just said that they control the flaps, and you can hear there's absolutely no functioning of the flaps at all. They're not moving. I've switched them all the way down. You can see there's no behavior in the rudder. That's not moving at all. So yeah, we've kind of broke it really, haven't we? That's in theory not in a flyable state. However, you do have the manual reversion of the control surfaces. So what we'll just do is pop inside and we'll just mess around a little bit more. Now at this point what we can do is we can even turn all the pumps on, and we'll see all the lights will go out and the pressures come up. The lights don't go out until the pressures reach their minimum pressure. You can see it's going up to 3000 psi. A normal pressure for a hydraulic system is generally around 3000 psi, and you can see the engine mechanical pumps are still a bit low at the moment because obviously we haven't wound the bad boys up. So what we can do now is, having done that, we can go up here and we can go and turn these things off. We'll just turn these things off. In fact, we'll just turn the whole lot off. Now, because we've got the alternate, we should be able to go outside. Because we've turned the rudder off completely, both rudder systems are completely off, the alternate's sprung to life and gone, hey, the standby, sorry, has sprung to life and gone, you still need your lower rudder, you still need to be able to fly this bad boy. So if we go outside, you can see now the flaps have functioned because we've got the hydraulic power applied. You can see the leading edge devices have gone as well, and what we can do now is, if I manipulate the rudder, you can see the lower rudder only is working, which is correct. So there's differences between the functioning of the upper and lower rudders, which is absolutely spot on. We do like that indeed. So let's just pop back inside. We'll start to plug things back in again, because at the end of the day we are going to take this thing airborne. We might break it a little bit before we do. However, there we go in relation to that thus far. Now it's all very well and good saying, well, hang on a minute, that's great because you can see the control surface movements and you can see all the various things in relation to that. Let's just put all our flaps up, we don't want them down at the minute, and standby is back to normal, so that's all good. It's very easy to go, oh well, you know, most sims will simulate control surface movements and flaps, etc. Interesting observation here, by the way, is you notice the flaps have got inboard and outboard, and each flap system has two needles, so left and right. So it's fascinating that compared to a more modern aircraft, you've got so much information about the flaps. Not just the lights, which you would normally get, but you've actually got a lot of information about the mechanical position of the flaps, which, you know, that's fantastic. And actually, it's quite useful because if you overspeed the flaps in this, with a lot of X-plane aircraft, you'll get an indication you've oversped the flaps. But the key thing here is actually you can tell which flaps are affected. And one of the things you can then do is figure out, you know, let's say the left outboard flap is stuck at 2 or 5 degrees. One of the options you have is then to set all of the flaps to 2 or 5 degrees and then to fly it in that configuration. So you've got balance left and right in terms of roll, and also you've got the same sort of pitch qualities in terms of the left and right wings. Really nice feature being able to see that, and actually it does work. I've had it where I've oversped the flaps and one flap ended up being stuck, and it does make a difference. It's really quite good how that works, so do like that. Very good indeed. Now what we're going to do now is just have a look at a couple of bits in relation to whether or not the systems do what you would expect them to do. So what we're going to do now is we'll just turn all of these off. Now remembering, if I turn these off, it has no effect on the standby. The standby system still doesn't go, so we've lost our hydraulics now. And if you remember, the two things that we said were separate between these are the braking systems and the steering systems. So we mentioned that earlier. So at this point what we're going to do is we're just going to take the brakes off, put the throttles up a bit, and now what we're going to do is the parking brakes off and the brakes are going on. Look, brakes are on, pedals are down, brakes are on, nothing's happening, not slowing down. However, I've also got no nose wheel steering, so I'm trying my nose wheel steering here, and with no nose wheel steering we are going to struggle, definitely going to struggle. No brakes. Now what we said was System Bravo was the nose steering, so let's turn System Bravo on, and we should then be able to steer. There we go. You can see the steering. I'm not going to go too far. And then finally System Alpha we said was the one with the main gear brakes. So if we put that on, we should find that we are able to brake again. And there we go, we can brake. So you can see that actually the functions that we expect are exactly what we get, which is really nice. So we can mess around turning things on and off, and we can see that ultimately the systems are doing what they're doing. Now one of the things that's an observation down here is you can see the rudder displacement on the top and bottom. That's absolutely correct, because the rudders do have different displacements in real life. So one of them will displace more than the other, and you can see the upper one is displacing more than the lower. So let's just pop inside and we'll have a quick discussion on the flight controls and the hydraulics for the flight controls. They're on. Now, as I said previously, the flight controls are hydraulically powered under normal circumstances. So you've got your rudder left and right. We've already discussed that. You can probably hear it clattering around in the background. If I use this camera, then I should be able to demonstrate a little bit better. Now the flight controls work in two functions. If you have hydraulics, your elevators, your hydraulics will move the main elevator, and you can see we've got a horn balance here to help aerodynamically in terms of the weight of the controls, and you can also see we've got a balance tab. So as the elevator drops down, the balance tab goes up, and what it does is it aerodynamically assists the elevator. So it reduces the loading on the elevator in effect, which is, that's pretty much what you want in relation to the whole system. However, if you were to have a hydraulic failure and you had no hydraulics for the elevator, what actually happens is you revert to a situation where your stick is controlling this little panel here. And instead of being a balance tab, what it then becomes is it becomes an aerodynamic tab. And what happens is your stick will just move this, and in the airflow, the shape of this, the angle of attack of this little panel here, will then fly the elevator into the position you want, and the elevator will move the tailplane into the position you want for that. Very clever system. As I say, the rudder has no effective version of that. It is purely hydraulic. And then as we come down here, we've got exactly the same thing. So I'm just going to mention a couple more bits whilst I think about it. This switch here, we did mention it, the hydraulic brake interconnect. Now, the main brakes are only powered by the Bravo system normally, the main gear brakes. So let's assume, for example, our Bravo system has failed, so we'll just turn that off, lights come off, lights come on, and the pressure dissipates. What we're going to do now is we're going to just turn that on, and we'll see if we get some main gear brakes. So you can see the green light comes on. Now what that's doing is that's allowing hydraulic pressure from hydraulic system A to operate the brake system on our behalf. So what we can do now is let's just do this. Let's do a bit of this. Power ourselves up. And you can see we're moving, and let's just see if we've got main gear brakes. Yes, we have. So we'll close that off. Turn that back on. Get rid of that. And again, it does this normal thing where as soon as you flick the switch down, it goes to its normal position. One of the things I'm going to demonstrate is we do have a pneumatic brake handle that's functioning. So if I just get us going a bit, you can see that I can use pneumatic brakes to bring us to a halt, which is all very well and good. It's also variable, so where you see it says increase, it's not all or nothing. So that's all very good. We do like that. And the final thing we're going to do is we're going to properly brake it. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to run the engines up and see what's going to happen with the power. So whilst they work their way up and they spend some time at a very high power setting, you can see here they're just at the top of the red line. Now for normal climb you would be looking at sort of more 92% RPM, but here we're up to just over 100 looking at that. So what we'll do is we'll leave that doing what it's doing. We will also just mess around with these whilst we're at it, take the engine pumps off, and you can see here what we've got is another annunciator in terms of telling you what's gone wrong. Aileron system A and B, A, so the A systems have all gone, and if I come up here, just zoom out a little bit, we'll turn the rudder system B off. And again you can see the annunciator there for rudder system B. So this would be a bad state of affairs because we've got no rudder control at all, unless of course we were then to go over and make sure that we... There we go, that's what I was waiting for. Engine fire number 1, number 2, we'll bring the power back, pull both engines. Now what that does is that doesn't fire the extinguishers, that shuts off the fuel and a number of other systems, so it will disconnect the drive generator, for example. What we can then do is we can turn that switch, put that out, wait and see if it takes effect, and it does, and then turn the switch the other way and we'll put that one out, and you can see we're smoking nicely, having burnt it. And now I would suggest the fire's probably gone out if we jump back in, and indeed they have. And yeah, so it's got a working fire system as well, which is all very well and good. So before we take it airborne, I think we need to pause for a moment and just see where we're at. The systems complexity and the systems modelling for me is very, very good. I don't find many aircraft at all in the flight sim world where I think that this level of complexity has been brought into play. I mean, you know, you can turn off individual rudder dampers, look, and yaw dampers, which is, you know, the attention to detail is very high. Now, one of the things I'm going to mention at this point is that actually there's a lot of sims where you have the switches and the gauges move, and you see no real change in a lot of the things in terms of the actual performance of the aircraft. With this you do. You can see how many lights we've got lit up in terms of the IDG. Now here's a very interesting one. If you remember, I've just mentioned that the fire handle shuts off a number of things. It doesn't just if you like, turn the engine off. It shuts off a lot of other ancillary bits. One of which is, I mentioned, it disconnects the IDGs, the generator drives. And if you look up here, engines 1 and 2 were the two we had the fire on. Engine 2 had already turned off the IDG, the AC generator drive. I keep referring to it as IDG, which is the more modern term. But if you remember, we'd turned that off manually at the start. Now you can see that we've got the amber light here. This one's been turned off of its own accord. And so consequently that is really, really nice. And as I say, it's very rare to see that level of depth in terms of simulating the systems. So if you like, as we pause before we go on to the flight dynamics, I'm going to reload the aircraft and fix everything because it's a little bit broken now. But you can tell that basically what's happened is this has been modelled to a very, very high level in terms of the actual functioning of the systems, in terms of hydraulics, electrical systems, you know, emergencies, and so on and so forth. So really, really impressed with that. As I say, there's a lot of aircraft out there in terms of add-ons where you can flick a switch and a light comes on, but it doesn't have any repercussions. It doesn't actually demonstrate the system as a whole. So we'll just run through the basics of programming the x-fmc. Now, as I say, just to clarify something from the previous video, x-fmc 2.7 is a freeware project, although donations are gratefully accepted by the guys who've developed it, and it's a generic FMC. So it's, I suppose the best way of describing it is externally it's of a Boeing style, but there are, because of the programming elements, there are differences between it and Boeing. So don't just expect to come across from a Boeing FMC, jump into this and to have it behave exactly as you would expect a Boeing. There are subtle differences that occasionally catch people out. Now the 3D panel element of it was actually developed by FlyJSim. So Jack of FlyJSim developed the 3D panel element, and if you like, the two work in harmony. So x-fmc in terms of the software and the 2D element come from the original x-fmc. The 3D panel plugin is from Jack, which is consequently why you don't see this 3D element in other aircraft. As I say, it is a generic FMC. It does have elements that, by virtue of being generic, are just restrictions that are unavoidable. The main one being VNAV. VNAV is not a functional VNAV. It's basically a sort of, if you like, a performance advisory VNAV, which is actually fine, because a lot of these aircraft of this era, they didn't have auto throttles, and consequently they are not very good in terms of VNAV anyway, because the only way to manage your descent is to manually address it with your throttles. So yeah, it's not an issue for this. In fact, this FMC for my money is actually quite well suited to it. I say for my money, it doesn't cost you anything, but it's well worth it. Just bear in mind, obviously, that it's not Jack who wrote the underlying software for it. So if you do have any sort of questions regarding operating it, then I'd direct you to the x-fmc website firstly for it. However, what we're going to do is we're going to go through quickly programming it so that those guys who find the odd hiccup with it can see where it's at. POSINIT is a very usual POSINIT style page, so I'm at Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, which is Manchester. We'll pop that in there, and you can see the time comes up and the GPS position is where we're at. We can go across to route now. Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, we're going to go to Echo Golf Bravo Bravo. We're not really, we're going to stop part way through. Echo Golf Bravo Bravo, boom, in it goes, and we can activate that. When you press activate, you'll hear the bing bing. That basically means you need to execute it, so that the element's gone into the system but it's not currently executed. So let's go to the next page, and in terms of the route now, we're going to go to Sonics. Now this is one of the elements, is that you need to put your first waypoint in before you then put your departure. Lima 975 takes us to Denbigh. Then we go on the November 57 to Trent. November 57 to Trent. Tango November Tango, the VOR. VOR DME. Then we go on the Tango 420. Tango 420. And that takes us to Welling, which I know well because it was on my instrument rating test route. Welling. And then finally we go to Buzzard, B-U-Z-A-D. And that's a direct to. What we can then do is we can then go into the departures and arrivals, and that will have enough information now for us to do departures and arrivals SIDS. Now you'll notice, unlike a normal FMC, what you don't get is you don't get a list of SIDS straight away. You need to choose your runway, and we are currently sat at 23 left. So if I select that, we get the bing bing and up it comes, and we're looking for the Sonics 1 Yankee, which is there, and execute that. So that's our departure done. In terms of our arrival, we're going to go over here. We're not doing a star, so we're just going to select ILS 33, execute that. It does, in fact, let's see what stars we've got available. Yeah, we're not going to bother with a star, I don't think, in terms of just programming this. In fact, we'll put Buzzard, look, if you look, the waypoint Buzzard, Olive 3 Alpha, so we will put that in. Then what we can do from there, we don't want to transition. We can put one in, but in fact no, we'll not bother with a transition. So we'll go back to init ref. We've done position, we've done route, we've done all of that. So at this point we're going to go to performance.
MCDU performance page. Fuel load.
Gross weight is just entered in, it does it automatically. We'll put reserves of 2.0, we'll put cost index just a nominal 25. Cruise altitude, we'll see if it can get up to 270. It should be able to, even though it's a fairly short distance flight. And you can see it's calculated all our fuel for us. Going to the thrust limit page, you can select different flex temperatures and different takeoff thrust settings and climb settings. We're not going to bother with that.
Takeoff data.
Takeoff data, we're going to do flaps 5. So that goes in there, and you can see it works out our data here. Now what I can do here is I can just dump across to this, and we'll have a look at what we've got. So flaps 5, 137, 137, 149, 137, 137. So you can see it's worked out nicely. It has matched up in terms of the figures. So checklist complete, which is all very well and good. However, what we can do now is we'll just pop into the legs and we will check that we've got everything we need. Now you can see it's limited as to 250 below 10,000, which is all very good. We do like that. You can change this obviously if you want, but we'll manually control the speed on climb out. Next page, no discontinuities. You can see as it's gone above flight level 100, it's gone to the normal element of 300 knots there, and as it descends it comes back down, which is all very good. So we'll go back up to here. In fact, what we need to do is go to VNAV. We'll just check the details here, because the transition altitude in the UK is 6,000 feet, not 18,000 as it is in the US. So that's the climb, sorry. And then we go to next page, 270, transition altitude there is going to be 6,000 as well. So that's that all done. So here we go, back to takeoff. So that's all done. Pre-flight's complete. That's ready to go. We are not really going to follow that, in all honesty. I just thought before flying we'd have a quick look at this, and you can see the state of the aircraft, how we've wrecked it. Airframe's fine because we haven't actually even got airborne. Engine 1, condition dangerous, hence why it's red. Hot start no. But basically we've experienced a fire, replaced the engine. Engine 2 experienced a fire, replaced the engine. However, it's in slightly less bad condition. If you remember, this is the one where we pulled the fire handle first. Engine 3 is all fine. We didn't even mess around with a hot start with that one, so that's all fine, and obviously the APU is still fine. So we've made a right mess of that. What we can do now is we can sort ourselves out and we'll get airborne and carry on. So here we are, ready to go again. Everything's functioning as it should. The only exception to that is the APU's had a bit of a wibble wobble, and so it's playing silly games. However, we're not going to worry about that for this. So what we're going to do is going to bring the power up gently. We're still on the toe brakes. VCARD, just to check the speeds are correct. We want flaps 5, and they're there and bugged. So we've got V1 135, rotate 135, V2 147, and we'll aim to climb out at 157, V2 plus 10. Now, in terms of looking at our gauges, I reckon with this our limit's going to be our EPA. So we'll gradually bring it up. There's EPA, there's a limit just a little bit below, and you can see the other gauges are well into the green at the minute. So the main consideration there in terms of 80 knots, check. The main consideration in terms of engine there is EPA. As we accelerate, however, you can just squeeze a little bit more out of the engines.
V1, rotate.
There we go. Positive rate, gear up. A little bit early maybe with that. And we can just trim it into that sort of position. Trim's a little bit slow if anything. I wouldn't say that's a criticism, that's just really I suppose a fact of some trims on some aircraft are a little bit quick, other trims on other aircraft are less so. So we'll just get a bit of clearance from the ground, and then we'll start the full process of cleaning up. One of the things we've got to be wary of now is the N1. If we run it too long at a too high a temperature, what we will do is set fire to the engines. So actually maintain the heading, which don't just drift off. Okay, so we'll just drop the nose a bit and start to gain some speed. What we'll also do at the same time is just nudge off the power a little bit. What we didn't do, which we need to do, is we're going to use 200 knots as a climb speed. So what we can do now is we're going to come down here, make sure that's on heading to start with, come down here, heading. Sometimes it's hard to find the switches. Heading, altitude, and so look, make sure it's indicated airspeed hold, and it is. And then what we're actually going to do, instead of just going into heading, we'll go all the way into aux nav. And aux nav, what that does is that takes us onto our GPS, as you see down here. It says GPS, it's not really GPS that it's on about our LNAV. Get rid of that and away we go. And it really is that easy. A nice steady climb, two and a bit thousand feet per minute. We're coming up 1,000 feet to go on our 5,000 feet altitude. What we'll be able to do in a moment is we'll just call up the map and we'll have a look at what's happening in terms of the actual LNAV profile. What we're following, we're expected to turn around to the north. There we go, nicely levelling, and the speed's increasing. We're looking for 250 as our next speed bug. Now obviously we haven't got auto throttle, so we're going to have to manage the speed manually, which isn't a great problem. What we can do now is just monitor our navigation. That's all fine. Now you can see we've jumped on a little bit, and what's happening now is you can see that the LNAV of x-fmc has taken charge of our horizontal navigation. We're still at 5,000 feet. We're going to start a climb in a moment, but we're just going to let it get round the turn, and that's bringing us round to head towards the north, which is what we expected. We're going to intercept this course here, 343 northerly course. If I have a quick look at the map, we'll see where we're at. Before we do that, let's do our after takeoff checks. Very brief ones. Flaps are up, gear is off, everything else is fine. So now what we're doing is we're intercepting that course. If I look on the location local map, you'll see we've come out of here now, we've routed to the north, and now we're going to intercept this course. And this is this magenta line here is the actual outbound radial from the beacon that we've preset. So we're going to come up here, intercept Lima 975, and then route out this way. And that's pretty much that. What we are going to do is we're going to introduce a climb. We're going to continue our climb up to about, we'll do up to about 10,000 feet. No great drama. What we can do at that point, we've got that, indicated airspeed hold. If we introduce power, then that's what starts our climb, because we're still intent on maintaining. So we've got alt select, VORLOCK, GPS, which is all to do with actually the LNAV. 064 you can see is the heading now, and by controlling the power in this mode, indicated airspeed mode, this is a safe mode to use in many respects, because in theory by setting the indicated airspeed the aircraft will pitch to control that airspeed, so you shouldn't stall. The only risk you have is if you have too little power, obviously, to maintain the airspeed, it will descend and you risk control flight into terrain. However, generally speaking, for me, indicated airspeed is probably the safer of the climb modes, particularly at busy stages, because basically what you're doing is it gives you the margin to keep you clear of stalling as long as you can manage the power. So here we go, it's going to intercept this this outbound radial for the local map. Let's see here, going to intercept this outbound radial here, so yeah, doing a pretty good job, to be fair. And what we'll do is we'll let it continue climbing to 10,000 feet. We'll just add a little bit more power, give it a bit more climb oomph, so to speak. And what we're going to do is we're going to go out to legs. We're going to go out to Denby, I think it is. So here we are on our way to Denby now. This is the waypoint I wanted to track to. Just whilst the speed manages itself, what I wanted to do is just have a look up here, location, local map, and this is where it's flown with a little bit of a wobble here. You can see it's pretty much flown a really good SID. So Denby's over here, and it's flown a really nice SID. So what we're going to do is we're going to forget about the x-fmc now, and we're going to concentrate on the aircraft and its handling. So without further ado, let's get rid of this autopilot mumbo jumbo. That's what we want to get rid of. We will pre-select this down to 3,500, which is the platform altitude for Manchester, and we're going to go back to Manchester. So with that in mind, we're not overly concerned about any of the other instrumentation now. All we want to do is hand flight and trim it. So the first thing we're going to do is take the throttle off, and we'll go down to slow speed handling. Now whilst we do that, we'll have a look at the handling. It's slow to respond, but it's accurate to respond, and to be fair, these things aren't fighters, so in terms of the response, aileron response is good and fine. It's what I would have expected from a fairly large aircraft like this, and you know, it all does exactly as it should do. Now in terms of aileron manoeuvres and adverse yaw, I wouldn't expect to see much adverse yaw, because one of the key things is that the spoilers are engaged in the roll and they provide an inter-turn yaw effect. So as you can see, if we look at a point on the nose, let's look at a point here. So look at this point here, this yellow field. If I roll, if I roll to the left, it shouldn't go that much right of the nose, and in fact it's not going at all. So we've got no adverse yaw, which is pretty much as I would have expected in this sort of aircraft. So yeah, that's a key thing for me. I'm going to come back round towards the west. So we're pretty much travelling in a southerly direction, generally south, and we are now looking for slow speed handling. Now if I just pause it there and we'll jump outside. Now you can see now what's happening is we're starting to get to a pitch up state where as we're slowing down in order to increase or maintain altitude, I should say, we're having to continually pitch up and pitch up and pitch up, and this is going to take us towards a stall condition. Now obviously it's going to be prevalent when we hear the stall warning, which is like a stick shaker rumbling noise. However, we do have some leading edge devices down, so I reckon it's going to be a fairly slow speed. We haven't got any flaps as of yet of any significance. However, the key thing I'm going to look at here is this is the T-tail. Now several aircraft have had instances of what's called a deep stall, and a deep stall is thought to be caused by disturbed airflow from a stalled main wing going backwards and interfering with the tail. And obviously once you get to a stall condition and you're 15 degrees nose up, whatever it is, then in effect 15, 20, 25, it depends on the airspeed as to how nose up you'll be, but in effect what happens is the disturbed airflow goes over the tail and you lose authority of the tail, so you lose the ability to pitch. Now in certain aircraft with the configuration and the CFG and the weight and balance, what's then happened is the aircrew have been unable to use the elevator controls at all, and the aircraft has almost been in this sort of attitude, maybe a bit tail lower, and it's just basically descended, and as it's descended, the airflow coming up this way hits the wings, it gets disturbed, it's still stalled, and then the disturbed airflow goes over the tail, and you know, it keeps going. It's almost a vicious circle, so it's going to be interesting to see how this thing behaves in terms of its stall behaviour, or I should say more accurately, its approach to the stall in terms of the authority of the T-tail. Now as we look at it, it's quite a big slab of metal, that is. You know, it's not shy of its surface area. However, the actual elevators are also quite significant. They're full span elevators, look, and you know, they're 2/3 of the chord, so they're quite big, and I'll be interested to see just what we get in terms of the behaviour. So let's just let it decay its speed. We can just clear that. Let its speed to decay, and I would expect that we're going to start to see some very, very vague roll at slow speed. Yeah, the aircraft's not particularly, it's very vague. We can see it's starting to get very vague there indeed. I'm going to continue pulling, and now I'm pulling all and it's not doing anything. Push doesn't really do much. Pull, and what we're getting now is we're into an accelerated stall, and now what's happening is my control inputs, you can probably hear them, they're having absolutely no input on the plane. Big nose down moment, speed increases, and we'll do the same thing again. We'll not quite do an accelerated stall, but what we'll do is we'll just get ourselves into a good solid nose up position. We'll let the speed bleed away and we'll just see what actual control movement we have available to us. Now it's nice and balanced in the stall, it's not looking to drop a wing particularly, and I guess that's because we can't pull any further into the stall with the T-tail configuration, but there we go, we've lost it again. Absolutely no control in pitch whatsoever, so the T-tail is being blanked by the disturbed airflow from the main wing, which is really good. That's exactly as it should be. You wouldn't want to see that as an airline passenger, would you? Sync rate, yeah, whatever. Okay, so we can get rid of that single stage of flat we had out. Okay, in terms of general handling then, as I say, aileron response is accurate. It's not quick. I wouldn't expect it to be quick with this sort of aircraft, but it is accurate. and you know it's very nice to fly. It handles very nicely. Now in terms of the actual stability, now there's an element here in terms of spiral divergence, and there's a number of factors here in terms of lateral stability, spiral divergence, and the need to try and avoid Dutch roll. Now Dutch roll is a condition where the nose draws a figure of 8 and the wings rock backwards and forwards and the aircraft rolls left and right. And it's not only is it very, very uncomfortable, but in addition to that, the other key problem is that it can be dangerous at certain stages of flight for that behaviour to happen. So we try and damp out Dutch yaw as much as Dutch roll as much as we can. So in effect, it's the difference between this movement here along the longitudinal axis and this movement here along the normal axis. So if you like, the yaw and the roll, and one basically has greater authority than the other, and if it's the wrong way around you get Dutch roll. So that's why they've introduced over the years the yaw dampers. It's particularly prevalent with swing wing aircraft, not swing wing, particularly prevalent with swept wing aircraft, the phenomenon of Dutch roll, and consequently a lot of the time what happens is when you go into a roll like this, if I let go, we're not quite trimmed right, if I let go of the stick at low levels of bank, you'll see either neutral to positive stability, so we're just going around like we're on rails here, it's not really doing anything. Pitch isn't trimmed out properly, so we'll just trim that a little bit. But then what you see is we just go around on rails, so we've got neutral stability. Once we go past about 25 degrees, what you'll find is we'll go into a spiral dive, which is basically in this stage, you can see it's only gentle. It's a weak spiral dive, so it's a weak divergent stability in terms of roll there. So yeah, it's pretty docile, to be fair. Now in terms of the actual aileron or the roll stability, I should say, it's very dependent on the aircraft manufacturer, because one of the things that they're keen to do is to avoid Dutch roll, and in doing so sometimes what happens is, even if you've got elements of positive stability or elements of the aircraft or airframe that would induce positive stability, so swept wings and dihedral, sometimes what happens is the aircraft will be designed in such a method that actually you end up with neutral stability to stop the divergent instabilities that are potentially present if you're looking at managing your Dutch roll. So that's that element. What we're going to do now is we're just going to have a look at the pitch and the yaw. So pitch, what I need to do is, more than anything, is get it trimmed, because without it trimmed we're not really going to see what we want to see. Get it trimmed about 200 knots. Okay, that's pretty much trimmed. So what I'm looking for is the behaviour in terms of how much it returns. Now there's a little bit of an oscillation, it damps out very quickly, and as the speed rises I'd expect to see the nose climb, and it does. And then what should happen is it should aim to seek out its natural trimmed state. And in this case it was level at about 200 knots. So what now goes up is what happens is the nose goes up, the speed will drop as the centre of pressure and the CFG change their relationship. Then what we will see is the speed drops past our trimmed speed, and we should start to see a nose down behaviour. And here we go, you can see it's starting to go nose down. You can see it quite significantly if we just look out here. It's quite a significant movement, that. And it will just keep oscillating like this until eventually it gets to its trimmed attitude and speed. So yeah, it's doing exactly as I would have expected it to do. Now let's snap ourselves out of that and have a look at the yaw. Now the yaw has quite a lot of authority in this aircraft. In fact, it has an awful lot of authority, and consequently it has the ability to pretty much throw you out of the sky if it's mishandled. However, it's very powerful. In fact, that's complete opposite aileron, so that's full right aileron, and I haven't even reached full left rudder yet. So yeah, the rudder is far more powerful than the ailerons in that respect. Bit of a wobble coming out. However, what I would say is it's nicely damped, it's very progressive, and it makes it a very nice aircraft to fly in that respect. So what we're going to do is we're going to set ourselves up for an approach. So welcome back. We're going to start our approach to Manchester. We're still above, we're just at our platform altitude. I noticed the glide slope's coming in early, however the localizer's here as well, so once we're centered on the localizer we'll be okay to descend with the glide slope. Should never descend with the glide slope until you're on localizer, purely out of the fact that the localizer is what gives you your protected area, so to speak. So let's turn like that. We're still a little bit high, but we can bring ourselves down. What state's our gear in? It is down. Just bring out a little bit of speed brake, just to help the speed come down a little bit. Now we are low, so we can bring the speed off by lifting the nose, trim into it, a little bit of a turn to the left. And this is one of the things for me is the key to figuring out whether an aircraft is well designed or not, more than anything else, is really to hand fly the thing, because it's hand flying where an aircraft shows its true credentials, and nowhere more so than when you're doing an ILS. So we want to make sure we've got a fairly slow rate of descent at the moment to recapture the glide slope. Big pitch change there with the flaps. So we'll bring it straight through to 25 degrees flaps. That should bring us a little bit of a bounce up, but also a nose down attitude. Far too high. Whilst it's very unprofessional landing, we'll land at flaps 30. That'll at least make sure our V speeds are correct. We're still a little bit high now. Can bring a lot of the power off. And there we go, we're starting to stabilise. Really bad approach on my part to start with there. A little bit of a rush, trying to talk through things as I was doing it. Now the rate of descent is far too high, because of that we'll have to bring in a little bit of power. Now at 140 knots you're looking at about 700 feet a minute rate of descent. We're slightly right of centre line. We're correcting glide slope nicely, correcting centre line nicely. Just need to trim a little bit. Need to add about 5 knots to our speed as well. So the key now is how does it fly in ILS, because fundamentally that's what these things get, is flown on an ILS down to 200 feet manually, and indeed automatically. These things are in the days before they had Cat 3 auto land status. So we've got a nice vertical speed going there. Speed's low, add a bit of power into that. We're drifting slightly right, correcting. Speed's back to where it needs to be. Going high, just drop the nose down a little bit, trim for it, make sure the nose isn't riding up. The vertical speed will recapture that glide slope for us. Don't want to do it too quickly, because otherwise what you end up doing is seesawing through the whole thing, and that's not what we want. It's actually not recovering, so we will have to put our nose down quite significantly. Now we shouldn't need 1,000 feet a minute rate of descent to maintain this glide slope. Just getting pushed around a little bit. Glide slope's coming back in. If it had been more than half scale deviation, that's enough to fail an instrument rating test. You'd have to go around from that. You'd fail it if you didn't go around. You don't fail it if you do go around, because obviously their key is they want you to recognise that there's an inaccuracy or an error. This thing's nice and speed stable on approach. I'm not having to mess around with the throttles too much. Just gently tease them around every now and again. 2 reds, 2 whites, runway's clear. Now just watching the rate of descent, ideally looking for about 750 feet a minute, something like that, which we're looking nice. We've got a good stable approach now, and this thing's flying beautifully. It's flying really nicely by hand, and as I say, this is the key for me in terms of where we go with this. So let's see how we get on with the actual landing. We're fully visual now. We're not worried about the vertical speed indicator or any instruments at this point. What we're, well, apart from speed, the only thing we're interested in speed. We're drifting right. That's not good. We don't want that at this stage of a landing.
100.
Just get ourselves back onto centre line.
30, 20, 10.
Now, one of the things we mustn't do, bit of a bounce, mustn't just drop the nose onto the tarmac. reversers are on. Below 80 knots, manual braking, and bring it to a halt. So really, the key now is, where does that leave us in relation to this thing? Okay, we'll try and summarise it as much as we can now, really. The first video we went about interior and exterior modelling. The thing is fantastic in terms of its interior modelling, its cockpit, and how everything feels. Actually, we'll just get rid of the thrust reversers. It just oozes character. The texturing, the shaping, the whole thing, the lighting, particular lighting in this thing is stunning. So the exterior is good. It's well modelled in terms of 3D modelling. The textures for the paint jobs, there's a lot of paint jobs out there for this aircraft. Now, beyond that, really, the systems modelling in this is just brilliant. There's no other way of describing it. It's just brilliant. And why do I say that? Well, the systems modelling is in keeping with the era, so it's all about, if you like, big clunky switches, big dials, all of these things going whir, clunk. And I can't begin to imagine how complex it is to code something like this, and it works really, really well. I mean, particularly the hydraulics. I love the idea of the hydraulics and the electrical systems. The more you dig around in them, the more you realise how much depth there is to it. And I think that is one of the key things for me as a study sim. Can I operate it and fly it as the real thing? And with this, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Nice addition to have the FMC, the x-fmc as an option. Really nice to see that in the aircraft. Nice to have the INS for the extra $10 if you wanted to pay for that. But overall, the functionality of the panels, the lamps, the switches, the systems, the hydraulics, the electrical systems, the environmental conditioning control systems, the overhead systems, the lighting, everything is absolutely superb. The thing will set itself on fire. It has got its failures modelling. Our APU, as I said earlier, is a bit dead. However, we're not going to be able to fix it. But with the systems modelling, with everything it's got going for it in terms of that and the maintenance, it's also got further depth. And herein comes an element of it. For me, there's 3 layers to this aircraft. The first layer is, if you like, the general use of an aircraft. And this is a nice, enjoyable aircraft that's fun to fly. The character is in spades here. It's a very charismatic aircraft. And it's incredibly enjoyable to fly. Its hand flying characteristics are really nice. So if you look at it on that bottom level as just a straightforward simulated aircraft, it's very good. It's without doubt. But that's not the be all and end all. The fact that you've got the maintenance options, you've got multiple different nav modes, and you've got things like that that bring the character in, it's superb. The quick checklists, again, nice little features. This thing abounds with lovely little features, and that's really nice to see. The third layer is, if you like, where you go into the study sim layer, and this is the bit that we've been poking around in more than anything else with the systems. The systems are very well represented in this aircraft, and I've gone through page after page after page of documentation for this thing. And there's all sorts of things, hydraulic brake interconnect, it's all working, it's all there. The hydraulics, it's all working, it's all there. The hydraulic standby systems and the methods of activating it, it's all there. The environmental controls, all there. And the electrical systems, mind-blowing as they are of a good level in terms of simulation. Now the element here is, I stress that because I haven't got enough knowledge to dig deep down into this, but suffice to say, when we were messing around breaking things earlier, everything that we did in terms of breaking things and fixing things was consistent with everything I'd found in the manuals. So I have no doubt that as a whole, this panel is possibly one of the best modelled panels I've seen in X-Plane 10. And you add all of that together as a package, and for me, this is a top-notch add-on. And I think the key thing here is the depth that's available. It can be operated as an enjoyable X-Plane 10 add-on. excluding everything else. It can just be enjoyed as a very nice aircraft to fly around in. Really, really good. Most of this panel, other than just flicking a dozen or so switches to get the thing started, actually doesn't affect most normal flights, so it's not something to be scared of. In effect, you can consider this the missing bit of the 737 panel from up here. Read the instructions and you know, or watch the tutorials or whatever, and it's fairly straightforward to get through this. As I say, you only literally need to throw a dozen switches and that's you done for the flight pretty much with this thing. Now, obviously in real life the flight engineer would take a great deal more interest in managing it, but from our perspective, if you want to use it just as a, you know, almost a 737, it can pretty much do that. As I say, the next tier to go on from there is to do it in terms of bringing in the lifestyle elements of it, in terms of maintenance, the sort of almost the role play elements, for the better way of putting it, the maintenance, the use of the aircraft, the possibility of failures, etc. You know, so you've got all of this stuff that you can come in terms of maintenance and failures off, and all of these elements, and you know, bringing that in takes it to another level, and it's, you know, it's like an airliner equivalent of an A2A aircraft, which is really, really nice to see. You know, I'd like more airliners to have that failure option available to the pilot in terms of making it a more dynamic experience for them. And then the final element is the systems in terms of the depth of the studies, and you know, it must have taken Jack an awfully long time to work his way through all the literature for this, and I take my hat off to him. He's done a very, very good job. So the long and the short of it really is, we've tried to break it, we've broken it several times, it's broken consistently, it's broken as it should do with the manual, it's operated as it should do with the manual, and for me, I would have to say that in my opinion, for the criteria that I set, this is a study sim. It does require some learning, so you can set your engines on fire quite comfortably, as we have seen, and if you mismanage or mishandle the aircraft, then it has the potential to bite. But that doesn't take away from the fact that in the time I've spent flying this thing, it's been an absolute peach. It's an adorable thing to fly. So with that, you obviously can tell that I really enjoy this product. I do think it's worth the money, and I do think it deserves to be considered to be a study sim. So with that in mind, guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.